Good afternoon. My name is Mark Goodman. I represent SCORE Chicago. You're watching live interactive call-in TV here on CAN TV 21. This is our 5th season of doing CAN TV. It's our second show with Scott Brandwein. Scott is a real estate broker, and we'll tell you a little bit about what Scott does in a minute. This is a live interactive call-in TV show, and we're going to be talking about small business. We're going to be talking about small business incubators. So let me do a little bit of preview slides here. Like I said, it is July 10th. We're going to be talking about business incubators, a little bit on why people come to SCORE. People come to SCORE because they want to start or buy a business. We help people with SBF financing and strategic issues. We also help people relative to marketing their business online. I'll show you a little bit about SCORE after we get a little bit more into the discussion. So we'll get to there. So Scott, tell me about yourself and, what the heck a real estate broker does.
Well, sure. So real estate brokers generally help occupiers of space, people that are starting businesses or running businesses, find space to lease or to buy if they wish to own. And sometimes brokers will represent the landlord as well, or the seller of the real estate.
So how did you become a real estate broker?
And so I became a real estate broker because I was really interested in both the investment side of real estate, owning real estate, but also how people use real estate and how they make decisions about how much space they should lease and where they should lease or where they should buy and how much they should pay. It's a very interesting business. And then, of course, there's also the building out of the spaces. So it's a complex, really interesting business.
So if I'm looking to rent space, how do you help me figure out how much I should pay?
And so the first thing, particularly a small business owner or a new business, is have a budget. Think about how much space you need and how you're going to use it based on how many people you're going to have working in the space, what you're going to be using the space for, and think about what you can afford. Sometimes that's a percentage of revenues that you expect, and sometimes it's just a function of the product or service that you're producing out of that space.
So how does a real estate broker, help me find space?
And so the first thing that a broker would do with a client is to find out what are the requirements, how much space do you need, what would be the ideal location, what's the type of building that you're looking for, are you going to have customers coming to visit you at the space? Are you going to need to recruit people? So you have to think about where your employees are going to find it convenient to come to work, and where your customers, if you have interface with your customers at the facility or not.
So I think the first thing to think about if you're looking to rent space is, how do you want to present yourself to customers? A lot of people have virtual businesses and basically don't necessarily need a space to represent themselves as customers. On the other hand, there is a certain presence to actually having space and having people come to their space, and
yes.
People have so many choices. I'll never forget the first time I got an invitation to go to the office on the 88th floor of the Sears Tower. And I thought, well, this is really cool. These people have offices on the 88th floor of the Sears Tower. And then I got up there, and it was like going into the 88th floor warehouse.
Yes.
So, on one dimension, a marquee address. On the other dimension, I'm not sure that it particularly played that positively for me on the idea that, I knew that they were renting a desk on the 88th
yes.
floor.
Yes. And so a business needs to think about just the size of the building. The Willis Towers, 105-story office building, the biggest office building in the city. So things like the size of the building, which you were just referring to, and the ease of people finding where you are and getting to your office. Those are all things that translate into what's the right space or the wrong space for a particular company.
I'm thinking about people who might be renting space or people who might be thinking about renting space. When it comes to my discussion with the landlord, and Scott and I actually just went through this recently, what should I really do when I'm preparing myself to go have a discussion with a landlord?
Most important thing to do is to understand that the landlord is an expert in real estate. They own real estate, so it's a full-time occupation for them. And so make sure that you spend time with your broker or your real estate advisor before you go to that meeting with the landlord. And so that not only do you have a clear idea of what it is that you're looking to get out of the transaction in terms of financial terms, business terms, but also have a strategy for that meeting, because the landlord, of course, is going to try to maximize the outcome for themselves because they own the property. And so you want to have a good relationship with the landlord, but you also want to make sure that with the help of your advisor, you're really advocating.
Yeah, one of the things Scott and I were talking about is that, landlords are negotiating leases all the time, and most businesses only negotiate a lease at most once a year, and a lot of times
Yes.
once every 2 or 3 years.
And so the important thing is, since you're right, Mark, you do that so rarely, that make sure that you are prepared to sell yourself as a tenant, because all tenants are not equal. And so part of it is making a case to the landlord as to why you're going to be a great tenant. And what defines a great tenant? A great tenant is someone who's going to pay the rent on time, who's going to take care of the space, who ideally will take more space over time from the landlord, will renew the lease, will communicate well with the landlord. So don't think just because there's a market set of terms of what that space might be perceived to be worth. Go prepare for that meeting by going there to sell why you're a great tenant, and you should get a set of terms that's maybe more attractive than somebody else might have gotten.
So we're going to touch upon being a great tenant here when we're talking about incubators. If you do have a question relative to renting space or your lease, or working with a landlord, you can give us a call at 312-738-1060. Daryl is here on the phone and she'll talk to you. If you just have a question, you don't want to go on the air, you can just call in and she'll write down the question and pass it over to us. So let's talk a little bit more about selling yourself as a great tenant. What makes a tenant a great tenant for a landlord besides I'm going to pay on time?
Well, besides growing and renewing the lease, one of the things that makes the tenant attractive to a landlord is that there are some tenants that other businesses want to be around. Now, Google today is a very big company, but they are a good example in that when Google announced that they were going to a new building at 1000 West Randolph, which is in an emerging neighborhood, all of a sudden another 700,000 square feet of tenants filled up just like that in the building. And so there are some tenants that are a magnet for other tenants, and so even if you're a small tenant, you don't have to be a big tenant to be a magnet for other tenants who want to be around you.
So let's talk a little bit about business incubators. If you're a small business, especially if you're a technology business, but one of my frustrations is that I think that there's so much, press and so much activity around incubators that I think a lot of people think incubators are only for technology companies. But let's start with like a 101 thing is, what is a business incubator?
So a business incubator is really, think of it as just simply shared space. It'd be no different than renting a house and sharing it with roommates.
Okay.
In some ways, it's sort of like a college dormitory. But it's a very professional environment, and it's a way for either small businesses or startup companies to get into space quickly because the space is ready to move into. It's wired for your telephones and for your computer. And one of the advantages is that by sharing space with other people, no different than sharing a house or an apartment with roommates or getting to know people in college, you get to know all of these other businesses. And often in an incubator, you will meet someone in the incubator that can help you build your business either as a customer, as a vendor, or just an advisor. So it brings a community of business people together all by sharing space.
So how is a business incubator different than, that shared space that's up on the 88th floor of the Willis Tower?
And so there are large corporations. It's an industry that's consolidated. There is very large corporations like the one that leased the entire 88th floor. And their customer tends to be large corporations that are just, let's say, looking for a sales office for somebody.
Okay.
And incubators are culturally different. They're typically for small businesses, and startups. And so you rarely would see a big company leasing a desk or an office in an incubator. It's really meant for small businesses and startup companies. So it's a very different profile. Tenant.
So let's talk about there's a couple of relatively high profile incubators in the Chicago area. There's 1871, and then somewhat tangential to 1871 is Matter.
Yes.
So let's talk about first 1871 and how does 1871 function as an incubator, and why should I as a company want to rent space at 1871?
And so one of the things that distinguishes incubators is some, quite frankly, well, there's some are larger, and some have, because of the mix of tenants, it's almost like a shopping mall.
Okay.
In order to have a successful shopping mall, you have to have the right mix of tenants. So they're very well run, and most popular incubators make sure that they have tenants that complement each other, and that there's a sense of energy when you walk into the space, and that they run programs, so they'll bring in experts from different areas of the business world to put on seminars and give talks, and sometimes they will schedule people who are just volunteering, like an organization like SCORE, to just be available and to talk with someone that has a question or needs some advice about their business.
So the difference between an incubator like 1871 and the space up on the 88th floor of the Willis Tower is that the incubator 1871 is going to provide more of a intellectual infrastructure.
Yes, and a sense of community.
Okay, a sense of community.
Where the tenants are there because they want to be a part of something, and as opposed to just coming to work, walking into your office, and working in your office all day long. Incubators are designed with a lot of open space, so that you purposely have to interact with people.
Okay.
It's encouraged, and people that lease space in the incubators want that sort of sense of community interaction with the other tenants.
So we have as far as I know with 1871, and maybe I'm wrong, is that within reason, any kind of company is really eligible to be a member? Are you really on something like 1871? Are you a member of 1871?
It is a membership because they do. Well, actually, they have more companies that would like to be there than they have spots for.
Oh, okay.
But they also consciously do that because they want the ability to screen people.
So for someplace like 1871, you have to fill out a form. You have to apply to get in. Maybe you'll get in or not.
Yes.
On the other hand, if you're looking for, corporate shared office space, as long as you have the money and they have the room.
Exactly right. And so the well-run incubators are very conscious of who the tenants are and who's leasing space. It goes back again to having that right mix of tenants, so it becomes that community, and that's why they do screen the people, and you actually have to fill out an application, and then I wouldn't call it an interview, but you come to a face-to-face meeting with the group that runs the incubator, and they talk with you about your business, why you'd like to lease space there, and sort of try to understand what your intentions are.
Well, this is a little bit like you're talking about that on one dimension you're applying to be part of their organization, and you have to sell yourself and convince essentially the management of 1871 that you are a appropriate company for their situation. So how much does it cost to be a member of an incubator like 1871?
It's very affordable. It can be as low as as low as $200 to $250 a month, which gives you the ability to come in, and they call them touchdown spaces, where you don't have an assigned spot, but there's always a place. Everything's Wi-Fi, everything's wireless, and there's tables that you can sit at, and people and you just find a spot and you sit down and you start working. And then if you want a reserved spot or then you'll pay more money for that. But the well-run incubators really discourage that. Again, the interaction's encouraged. So they try to minimize the amount of assigned areas, And there's really there are conference rooms that you can use. And as you grow as a company, sometimes they have some designated spaces because some businesses do have to have a defined area, but they try to minimize that.
And I think when you, as a customer, come into a company that's in an incubator, there is a certain energy
Yes.
that is very positive, as opposed to sometimes just shared office spaces. I observed going up to the 8th floor of the Willis Tower was shared office space. So we were talking earlier about the idea that as incubators are maturing or coming along, we're starting to see essentially life. We know we have life science, but how would you characterize as incubators are maturing, we're having ones that are targeted more to specific areas?
And so the evolution of incubators now is that some incubators are designed around a specific industry. And so, for example, 1871 is opening up an incubator next door to it on the same floor called Matter, that's focused solely on the healthcare and life sciences industry. And so the incubators are getting more sophisticated and having what they call industry verticals. And then what they do is they create accelerator programs for companies in a certain industry. Like, for example, there's one that's been started now at 1871 that's going to be focused purely on the real estate industry, on real estate startup companies.
Okay. So I have an incubator. An incubator is a space for me to go in and work with my customers, to work with my peers,
Yes.
to work with, complementary type companies. And then I have an accelerator. So how is an accelerator different than an incubator?
And so an accelerator is typically a 90-day to 120-day program
Okay.
where there are mentors on site that you can meet with on a regular basis, and under those programs, typically the operator of the accelerator will take an equity position in the company. So this is typically a startup, and in exchange for that, they'll give them some upfront funding. So the typical model is maybe you'll get somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000 in seed capital for your startup idea. The accelerator program will take a 6 to 7% equity stake in your company, but in exchange for that, you'll have access to, it's not uncommon to have 150 to 250 mentors that come from all different areas of business that are there available to you to counsel you during that 90-day to 120-day accelerator program and help you with your business plan, make introductions for you, get you ready to go out to the investment community. A lot of it is helping you prepare to take your business plan out to the investment community.
So where does the money for an accelerator come from?
Some of the accelerators are owned by private individuals that do it under a for-profit model. Some are funded from public funds or foundations.
Do I have to be a member of the incubator to participate in the accelerator?
No, not necessarily. But what happens is once the companies go through the 90 to 120 day accelerator program, they typically then stay in the incubator beyond that, and that becomes their office space.
So we see sometimes incubators being associated with universities or being associated with hospitals. How do these incubators differ from, say, an 1871?
And so it has been, historically, all the incubators were within universities or colleges, and they still exist. The big difference between the universities is that they tend to let the tenants stay. And I emphasize stay because the best incubators are the ones that, just like there's a time for your child to move out of the house, if they stay too long, that's sometimes not healthy in terms of their personal growth, is that the universities tend to let them stay
Okay.
Quite frankly, let them stay too long.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the privately run incubators, and don't let they eventually you have to move on, because if you stayed there too long, that means you're not growing your business.
Okay.
Because an incubator is really designed for either small businesses or for startups, and you shouldn't be there beyond a certain reasonable amount of time, or you're not really executing on your plan to grow the business.
So, how do I know? How do I know if it's time for me to move out of my incubator?
Well, that's where the best incubators have great mentors and business people that volunteer their time to be mentors and advisors to the companies. And it's going to be on a company by company. Every set of circumstances will be different. But the key point is that you ideally want to be in an incubator where you have good mentors, good advisors, so that they can help you figure out whether or not you are on track or not, and if you really should be staying beyond a certain point.
So, there's some kind of a regular review process where they look at my business, because on one dimension, what you're saying is that I could go to the incubator and say, I'd like to renew my relationship. On the other hand, the incubator may say to me, based upon the feedback that really the incubator is getting from the mentors, that maybe it's time for me to move on for one reason or another.
Yes, and so that's where the tough love comes in, and it's a way of it. The well-run incubators understand that if they're doing their job, then they need to help the companies grow, which means they have to move out, because incubators are not designed for big companies. They're designed for companies that have, say, 2 to 3 people to as many as, say, 10, 12 people. But once you get beyond that point, it's not cost effective to be in an incubator. It's not really the right environment. At that point, you really need some private space.
Okay. So one last question, as I was reading about the Goose Island manufacturing operation. Now, is the Goose Island manufacturing operation an incubator that has like special equipment?
And so it's a great thing for Chicago that there will be 4 of these throughout the United States. And in this case, it won't be an office environment. It will be a high-tech manufacturing environment. And so if you have a business, a new business idea, or a small business that you want to grow that's dependent on high technology assembly or manufacturing, and you couldn't afford to have the equipment or the environment that you need to perform that function in, because you haven't scaled your business to a size yet where you can afford your own facility, you'll be able to share all of the equipment and the infrastructure of the facility. At the same time, they're creating relationships for training programs, because part of it is finding the skilled labor today in high-tech manufacturing.
So a lot of interesting options for you, whether you're a business or, as Scott is talking about, whether you're interested in getting involved in, high-tech industries from an employee point of view. They have the one in Goose Island. Over in Skokie, they're doing the work relative to nanotechnology. So something that is either a small business person or somebody interested in working for a small business in high technology, something for you to explore. I want to briefly go over a few SCORE things here. Let me flip through here. SCORE does offer free counseling and mentoring. We have an online appointment system, workshops and training and management consulting. If you want to check us out on social media, we're on Twitter at SCORE Chicago, YouTube at SCORE Chicago Video. Our website is www.scorechicago.org. If you're interested in things from SCORE, drop us an email at scorechicago.org or give us a call at 312-353-7724. We'll be doing this show every Thursday at 5:30 this summer, so why don't you check us out next week?